The year was 1873, and the dust of Colorado Territory hung thick in the air as another scorching summer day began to settle over the vast expanse of the Morrison Ranch. Jeremiah Morrison stood 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of being the wealthiest farmer in 3 counties. His weathered hands, testament to decades of working the unforgiving land that had made him his fortune. His ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, encompassing over 10,000 acres of prime grazing land and fertile soil that produced the finest wheat and corn west of the Mississippi River. But for all his success and prosperity, Jeremiah Morrison was a man haunted by the emptiness that echoed through the grand 2-story ranch house he had built for his wife Margaret 15 years prior. Margaret Morrison, once the belle of Denver society, had grown cold and distant over the years, her heart seemingly turning to stone as their attempts to have children repeatedly ended in heartbreak. The miscarriages had taken their toll on both of them, but while Jeremiah threw himself into expanding his empire, Margaret retreated into a world of bitter silence and increasing dependence on the laudanum that helped her sleep through the pain of her barren existence. It was into this atmosphere of wealth, tinged with sorrow, that 17-year-old Emma Sullivan arrived on a battered stagecoach one crisp October morning, carrying nothing but a small carpet bag and a letter of introduction from the Sisters of Mercy orphanage in Kansas City. Emma had nowhere else to go after aging out of the orphanage system, and the sisters had arranged for her to work as a household servant for the Morrison family in exchange for room, board, and a modest salary. She was a slight girl with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like spun copper and eyes the color of summer grass that seemed to hold depths of wisdom far beyond her years. From the moment Emma stepped foot on the Morrison Ranch, something shifted in the very air itself. Where Margaret moved through the house like a ghost, Emma brought life and warmth to every room she entered. Her laughter rang out as she worked, and she had a way of humming old Irish ballads that seemed to breathe soul back into the grand but lonely mansion. Jeremiah found himself lingering in doorways just to catch glimpses of her as she went about her duties, sweeping floors with a graceful efficiency that made even the most mundane tasks seem like a dance. Emma treated everyone with the same genuine kindness, from the lowest ranch hand to Jeremiah himself, never showing the deference that his wealth and status typically commanded. She would greet him each morning with a bright smile and ask about his plans for the day with such sincere interest that he began to look forward to these brief exchanges more than he cared to admit. Unlike Margaret, who barely acknowledged his presence anymore, Emma listened when he spoke about his dreams of expanding the ranch or his concerns about the harsh winter that was approaching. As the weeks turned into months, Jeremiah became increasingly aware of Emma's presence in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. He would find excuses to be in the house during the day, claiming he needed to review ledgers in his study, when in truth, he simply wanted to hear Emma's voice drifting from the kitchen as she sang while preparing meals. He began bringing her small gifts from his trips to town, claiming they were practical necessities, but always choosing items with a touch of beauty, like a hairbrush with an ornate silver handle or a shawl of the softest wool in a shade that perfectly matched her eyes. Emma, for her part, seemed to bloom under the attention and kindness that Jeremiah showed her. Having grown up in the harsh environment of an overcrowded orphanage where affection was scarce and individual attention virtually non-existent, she treasured every conversation they shared and every moment when his eyes would light up upon seeing her. She began to look forward to his return from the fields each evening and would often have fresh coffee waiting for him, along with whatever treats she had managed to create from the well-stocked pantry. Margaret, when she bothered to notice anything beyond her own misery, viewed Emma with a mixture of indifference and mild irritation. The girl's constant cheerfulness grated against her own perpetual gloom, and she occasionally made cutting remarks about Emma's humble origins or lack of proper education. But these barbs seemed to bounce off Emma like raindrops off a duck's back, and she continued to treat Margaret with unfailing courtesy and respect, even going so far as to prepare special teas and broths that she hoped might help ease Margaret's frequent headaches and stomach ailments. As winter settled over the Colorado Territory with a vengeance, bringing howling blizzards and temperatures that could kill a man in minutes, the 3 inhabitants of the Morrison ranch house found themselves increasingly isolated from the outside world. The ranch hands had been moved to the bunkhouse closer to the barns, where they could tend to the livestock, and supply runs to town became impossible for weeks at a time due to the treacherous conditions. In this enforced intimacy, the dynamics between Jeremiah, Margaret, and Emma began to shift in ways that would have profound consequences for all of them. Jeremiah found himself spending more and more time in the main house rather than in his office or out on the range, claiming that the cold made his old injuries ache and that he needed to be close to the fire. In truth, he was drawn like a moth to flame by Emma's warmth and vitality. They began to spend long evenings together in front of the fireplace, she mending clothes or knitting while he read aloud from books of poetry or adventure stories. Margaret, more often than not, had retired to her room early with her laudanum, leaving them alone in a domestic intimacy that felt both natural and dangerous. During one particularly fierce blizzard that lasted for 3 days, Emma fell ill with a fever that left her weak and delirious. Jeremiah insisted on helping to care for her, bringing cool cloths for her burning forehead and staying by her bedside through the long nights when her fever spiked. It was during one of these vigils, as he watched her sleep in the flickering candlelight, that Jeremiah finally admitted to himself what had been growing in his heart for months. He loved this orphan girl with a depth and intensity that both exhilarated and shamed him. She was young enough to be his daughter, an employee under his protection, and he was a married man whose wife lay sleeping just down the hall. When Emma recovered from her illness, something had changed between them that both could feel, but neither dared to name. Their conversations became charged with unspoken feelings. Their accidental touches lingered longer than propriety allowed, and the air between them seemed to crackle with an electricity that made them both acutely aware of every breath, every glance, every word. Jeremiah began to find excuses to work late in his study, knowing that Emma would bring him coffee and stay to chat about her day. These moments became the highlights of his existence, more precious to him than all his wealth and success combined. Emma, despite her youth and inexperience with matters of the heart, was not blind to what was happening between them. She had never known a father's love or protection, and Jeremiah's kindness and attention filled a void in her heart that she had never even realized existed. She began to see him not as her employer, but as the man who brought her books to read, who asked her opinion on ranch matters, who listened to her dreams of someday having a family of her own. The feelings that grew within her were confusing and frightening, but also more real and intense than anything she had ever experienced. As spring arrived and the snows began to melt, revealing the promise of new life across the ranch, Jeremiah made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer bear the charade of his marriage to Margaret, a woman who had become a stranger to him years ago. More importantly, he could no longer deny his feelings for Emma, feelings that had grown so strong they threatened to consume him entirely. He began to formulate a plan that was both desperate and dangerous, a plan that could cost him everything he had worked to build, but might also give him the only thing that truly mattered anymore. The plan began with small steps. Jeremiah started making discreet inquiries about divorce proceedings, something that was scandalous and difficult, but not impossible for a man of his wealth and influence. He consulted with lawyers in Denver, always careful to travel alone and conduct his business in the utmost secrecy. He also began to make arrangements to ensure that Emma would be provided for regardless of what happened, setting aside funds in a bank account under her name and making provisions in his will that would guarantee her security. Margaret, lost in her own world of pharmaceutical haze and bitter regret, remained oblivious to the storm that was brewing around her. She had long since stopped caring about her husband's comings and goings, viewing him as little more than a provider who ensured her comfortable lifestyle and steady supply of laudanum. She spent her days in a stupor, emerging only for meals that she picked at half-heartedly before retreating once again to her room and her bottles of medicine. It was on a warm evening in late May, as Emma tended the vegetable garden she had planted behind the house, that Jeremiah finally found the courage to speak the words that had been burning in his heart for months. He approached her as she knelt among the young tomato plants, her hands dark with soil and her face glowing with the satisfaction of honest work. When she looked up at him with that radiant smile that never failed to take his breath away, he knew there was no turning back. The conversation that followed was halting and awkward at first, as Jeremiah struggled to find the words to express feelings that seemed too large and complex for any language to contain. He spoke of his loneliness, of the emptiness that had consumed his marriage, of the way Emma had brought light and meaning back into his life. Emma listened in stunned silence as this powerful man, this pillar of the community, laid his heart bare before her, with a vulnerability that made her own heart ache with compassion and something deeper. When he finally confessed his love for her, Emma felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. She had suspected that his feelings ran deeper than mere kindness, had felt the electricity between them growing stronger with each passing day. But to hear the words spoken aloud made everything suddenly brilliantly real. Her response was immediate and instinctive, born not of calculation, but of the heart that had learned to love this complicated man who had shown her more care and consideration than she had ever known. But even as they held each other in the fading light of that spring evening, both knew that their love was a dangerous thing in a world that would not understand or forgive. Jeremiah was one of the most prominent men in the territory, and any scandal involving him would be seized upon by his enemies and competitors. Emma was an orphan with no family to protect her, vulnerable to the kind of gossip and speculation that could destroy her reputation and leave her with nowhere to turn. They began to meet in secret, stolen moments that became the most precious parts of their days. Sometimes it was a brief conversation in his study late at night, sometimes a walk through the pastures in the early morning before anyone else was awake. They were careful never to do anything that would compromise Emma's reputation or give concrete evidence of impropriety, but the emotional intimacy they shared was deeper and more meaningful than either had ever experienced. As summer arrived, and the ranch bustled with the activity of the growing season, their secret became increasingly difficult to maintain. The ranch hands began to notice the way Jeremiah's eyes followed Emma, the way he always seemed to find reasons to be wherever she was working. Some of the more observant men exchanged knowing glances and whispered conversations, though none dared to voice their suspicions openly to a man who held their livelihoods in his hands. It was Margaret, ironically, who precipitated the crisis that would bring everything to a head. Emerging from one of her increasingly rare periods of clarity, she began to notice things that had previously escaped her attention. The way her husband lingered at breakfast to chat with Emma, the expensive gifts that appeared among the girls' possessions, the looks that passed between them when they thought no one was watching. Margaret's jealousy, dormant for so many years, suddenly flared to life with an intensity that burned through her pharmaceutical fog like fire through dry grass. The confrontation, when it came, was explosive and devastating. Margaret burst into Jeremiah's study one evening as he sat reviewing accounts, her eyes blazing with a fury that made her seem more alive than she had appeared in years. She hurled accusations with the precision of thrown knives, each word calculated to wound as deeply as possible. She called Emma a scheming fortune hunter, a conniving orphan who had set her sights on seducing a wealthy man old enough to be her father. She threatened to expose them both to the community, to ruin them with scandal that would follow them to their graves. Jeremiah's response surprised even himself with its calm intensity. He made no denials, offered no excuses, but instead spoke with a quiet dignity that seemed to rob Margaret's fury of its power. He told her the truth, that he loved Emma with a depth and purity that he had never felt for anyone else, that she had awakened in him feelings he had thought were dead and buried. He acknowledged the scandal that would surely follow, but declared that he was prepared to face whatever consequences might come, rather than continue living the lie that their marriage had become. Margaret's reaction was swift and vicious. If she could not have Jeremiah's love, she would ensure that no one else could either. She began to spread whispers throughout the community, carefully crafted innuendos that painted Emma as a calculating seductress who had wormed her way into the Morrison household with the intention of destroying a respectable marriage. She wrote letters to influential friends in Denver, sharing her version of events with just enough truth mixed with speculation to make the story believable and damaging. As word of the scandal began to spread, Jeremiah found himself facing a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could abandon Emma to save his reputation and business interests, or he could stand by the woman he loved and face the consequences together. The decision, when it came to him, was easier than he had expected. Love, real love, was worth any sacrifice. The announcement that sent shockwaves through the territory came on a blazing hot day in July. Jeremiah Morrison, the richest and most respected farmer in Colorado, filed for divorce from his wife and simultaneously announced his intention to marry Emma Sullivan, the orphan girl who had been working as a servant in his household. The news spread like wildfire, carried by telegraph lines and whispered conversations, until it seemed that everyone west of the Mississippi River had heard some version of the scandalous tale. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some viewed Jeremiah's actions as the ultimate betrayal of social conventions and moral standards, a wealthy man's abuse of power over a vulnerable young woman in his employ. Others saw it as a romantic story of true love, conquering all obstacles, a powerful man willing to sacrifice everything for the woman who had captured his heart. The newspapers had a field day, with headlines ranging from condemnatory to sensational, each publication putting their own spin on the story to maximize sales and readership. Emma found herself at the center of a storm unlike anything she could have imagined. Women who had never spoken to her before now crossed the street to avoid her, while others approached with morbid curiosity, wanting to see for themselves the orphan girl who had supposedly bewitched one of the territory's most powerful men. She handled the attention with a dignity that impressed even her critics, never responding to the cruel comments or defensive about her relationship with Jeremiah. The legal proceedings were messy and public, as Margaret fought the divorce with a vindictiveness that shocked even those who knew her well. She hired the best lawyers her family's money could buy and contested every aspect of the proceedings, dragging intimate details of their marriage into the public record and making accusations that grew more outrageous with each court appearance. She painted herself as the wronged wife, the victim of a husband's midlife crisis and a scheming servant's manipulations. But Jeremiah's lawyers were equally skilled, and they had something Margaret's team lacked: the truth. They presented evidence of Margaret's laudanum addiction, her neglect of her wifely duties, and her increasingly erratic behavior over the years. They painted a picture of a marriage that had been dead in all but name for years before Emma had even arrived at the ranch. Most importantly, they demonstrated that far from being a calculating seductress, Emma had consistently tried to maintain appropriate boundaries and had only acknowledged her feelings when Jeremiah had declared his own. As the legal battle raged through the summer and into the fall, Jeremiah and Emma's relationship was tested in ways neither had anticipated. The constant scrutiny and public criticism took its toll, and there were moments when Emma wondered if she should release Jeremiah from his commitment to spare him further damage to his reputation. But each time doubt crept in, Jeremiah would reassure her with words and actions that demonstrated the depth of his commitment. The turning point came in November, when Margaret made a crucial error that ultimately doomed her cause. In a fit of rage during a particularly contentious court session, she revealed information about Jeremiah's business dealings that she could only have obtained by reading his private correspondence and financial records. This admission not only demonstrated her own breach of trust and invasion of privacy, but also revealed the extent to which her addiction had affected her judgment and behavior. The divorce was granted on a cold December morning, with the judge citing irreconcilable differences and Margaret's unfitness as a wife due to her substance abuse. The settlement was generous, ensuring that Margaret would be comfortable for the rest of her life, but it also freed Jeremiah to begin the next chapter of his life with the woman he loved. The wedding of Jeremiah Morrison and Emma Sullivan took place on New Year's Day, 1874, in a simple ceremony attended by only the most loyal friends and employees. Emma wore a dress of ivory silk that Jeremiah had commissioned from the finest seamstress in Denver, and her beauty on that day was so radiant that even some of their harshest critics had to admit that she looked every inch the lady she had become. Jeremiah, standing beside her in his best black suit, seemed years younger than his actual age, his face glowing with a happiness that had been absent for so many years that some had forgotten he was capable of such joy. The years that followed were the happiest of either of their lives. Emma proved to be not just a loving wife, but also a capable partner in managing the ranch, bringing fresh ideas and perspectives that helped increase productivity and profitability. She established a school for the children of the ranch workers, taught herself to keep books and manage accounts, and gradually won over even some of their former critics through her intelligence, kindness, and obvious devotion to her husband. Their first child, a son they named Samuel, was born in the autumn of 1875, followed by two daughters who completed their family and filled the ranch house with the laughter and energy it had lacked for so many years. Jeremiah proved to be a devoted father, making up for his late start with an enthusiasm and tenderness that delighted his young wife and created memories that would last their children's lifetimes. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy them gradually faded into local legend, becoming one of those stories that old-timers would tell around campfires about the days when the West was young and anything seemed possible. Some still whispered about the impropriety of it all, but most came to see what had always been obvious to those who truly knew them. That Jeremiah Morrison and Emma Sullivan had found in each other a love so genuine and powerful that it had overcome every obstacle society could place in their path. Margaret, for her part, eventually remarried a banker from St. Louis and faded into obscurity, her part in the drama becoming a cautionary tale about the destructive power of bitterness and addiction. She lived quietly for many years, and if she ever regretted her actions during those turbulent months, she kept those thoughts to herself. As for Jeremiah and Emma, they lived out their days at the Morrison Ranch, watching their children grow and prosper, building a legacy based not just on wealth and land, but on love, family, and the courage to follow their hearts despite the cost. Their story became a testament to the idea that true love, when it is real and pure and strong enough, can indeed conquer all obstacles and create something beautiful from even the most unlikely circumstances. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of love, adventure, and the untamed frontier. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or heard of a love story that defied social conventions? What do you think about Jeremiah and Emma's choice to follow their hearts despite the scandal it caused? Share your thoughts and let us know what other Old West stories you'd like to hear. Your engagement helps us bring you more tales from America's most fascinating era, so don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode.